Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. You're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. We hope you're keeping safe and well. So this morning, we're going to take a trip to the Far East and hear about a very interesting collaboration between Teagasc and China, specifically in the area of agricultural environmental research in East China. And we're delighted to be joined by Professor Owen Fenton, who's a researcher from Teagasc Johnstown Castle, working on soil hydrology and water table management, and Wenxuan Shi, who is a researcher from Johnstown Castle, working on greenhouse gas emissions from peat soils. Good morning, Owen, and good morning, Wenxuan.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Mark.
And we're also joined by Cathal who is going to be looking after questions for us this morning. Cathal, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Mark. All good. Thanks. Coming from a very hardy morning here in Wexford. Plenty of frost. But just to remind everyone as well that a really interesting topic coming up today. So make sure to get your questions into the Q&A. I'm sure we'll have a right chat at the end of it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Cathal. So, Owen, if I could start with you, could you tell us how did this collaboration, or where did this collaboration begin?
Yeah, no problem, Mark. I suppose going back a few years now, around 2017, Teagasc actually held a slurry conference in Johnstown Castle called Ramaran, and it was a contingent from China, from Beijing, came over to that conference, and kind of between a collaborative kind of idea over a PhD student. A PhD student, stayed here for 6 months, and then actually the following year he came back again with another master's students, and in that topic area of land drainage and phosphorus loss to water. So at that point I realized there was huge potential we were doing similar research in Beijing and in Ireland, and there was a lot of motivation, I suppose, to learn from each other. And then I went over in 2019 just to Beijing, and of course we had COVID then for that period of time. So we kept in touch over that period. But now the opportunity is that I can go back to China again, and at the moment we're in search of another PhD student to keep that collaboration going.
Excellent. And Wenxuan, you've been in Ireland a number of years now, and focusing on greenhouse gas emissions from peat soils, as we said in the introduction. There are a lot of similar challenges faced by China as well in terms of agri-environmental issues.
Yes, I mean the environmental issues just coming to our attention a little bit late. So far, on the agriculture side, we think we've mainly focused on the water quality, and also the GHG emission also coming to our attention recently. Yeah.
So you've come to the right place in terms of finding out more about particularly Teagasc and Johnstown Castle. Huge amount of research taking place there, and of course the new climate change research centre, which has been established. And it's great to see those collaborations. And I don't want to take away too much from your presentation because I know you do go through that. But I mean some significant differences though between between Ireland and China as well, merely in terms of size alone.
Yes, yes, it's a big difference because like the size of Ireland is even smaller than a province of China, and the population is even smaller than a city of China. So it's a big problem for China to solve all the problems and issues because due to the size and the population. Yeah, a lot of problem coming from that.
Okay, well, look, let's maybe tease some of those out after the presentation. We'll ask you to share your slides and to remind everyone who's tuned in this morning that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Teagasc YouTube channel, along with the presentation on the Teagasc website. And do send us your questions using the Q&A tab, and we'll look forward to our discussions afterwards. So we'll hand over to Owen and to Wenxuan, and we will speak to you afterwards.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. So we're going to both give the talk today. So you'll hear my voice for a while, then Wenxuan, and then back to me again. Okay. So the topic is agriculture, environmental research in East China, and straight away there you can see a picture of myself and Wenxuan over in Beijing. So this is the Chinese Agriculture University. That's the original entrance to the university there we're standing in front of. So there's a rich history of research in Beijing in all things agriculture. Just want to acknowledge as well that our visit was supported by the Chinese government, the Foreign Research Travel Bursary, and that was very, very important for us to be able to go to China and visit all of the places that I'm going to show you today. So we kind of went through this a little bit briefly with Mark earlier on, but this is a product of ongoing collaboration. Just in case anyone was late and joining, I'll just go through it again briefly. This happened around 2017 when a Chinese contingent came over to Johnstown Castle for the Ramaran conference on all things slurry. So there's a big emphasis on organic fertilizer use in agriculture in China as well. And then there's a picture of Bin Quinn Fan below here. He did part of his PhD with myself and Karen Daly here in Johnstown Castle on all things land drainage and phosphorus loss from drainage ditches. So very, very similar research going on in both areas. Then Fan came back a second time, and a master's student as well came back. Fan actually has married that master's student in the meantime, which is a nice story as well. And then just before COVID in 2019, I went over to Beijing. And I asked that the next time I went, instead of just staying in Beijing and listening to lectures from the students, I would actually like to get out onto farms and see, for myself, the types of farms, the types of crops. Maybe there's an extension service. I'd like to see that, in addition to all of the environmental research work going on at the universities. So that's where there's 4 main sites visited during the visit: Shenyang, Beijing, Shijiazhuang, and Shenzhen. And that really covers most of eastern China. So from the northeast all the way down to the southeast. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Wenxuan for a while.
Yeah, okay, good morning. And I will give you the brief introduction about the China and its agriculture and its related policies as the background to you. And as we all know, China is a big country. It's very different with islands. So the area is about 9.6 million square kilometers. And we have exceeding 1.4 billion population. And the landscape and the climate zone is very different across the whole country. So the agriculture actually highly depends on them, and that's why you can see from this graph, the cultivation area is mainly concentrated in the east part of China, because in the east part of China, there are more plain and hill, and the weather is warm and wet, suitable for the cultivation. West part and the north part is too dry and cold for the cultivation. So the problem is, it's bring the problem for China that we have large area, but very limited space for the croplands. But we need to support so many population, which means we only have the 10% of the total arable land in the world, but we need to support 20% of the population in the world. Although we are actually the largest agricultural output in the world. So, and this time, as Owen visited 4 cities in China. They are all mainly in the East China, but and across the north to south and different climate zone. And the first city, it was Shenyang. It's the capital city of Liaoning province. The second city is Beijing. It's the capital of China. And the third one is Shijiazhuang, which is the capital of Hebei province. It's very close to Beijing. So all of these three cities, they are located on the north plain of China, which is and the temperate climate zone. The annual rainfall is all around 600 millimeters per year, and since the good weather and the landscape, this area has always been the center of the culture, economy, and agriculture scene of China since the ancient time, and the population here in this area is also very large. And the fourth city is Shenzhen, which is a very new modern city in South China. And we can see the climate zone here is different. And the weather is completely different. It's more warm and humidity. And the rainfall is much more than the north part. And in these four cities, Owen met the different research groups, local research groups, and see their studies and did the local field visits. And we also exchanged the Teagasc research with them, looking for the future collaboration. And although the agriculture is one of the main industries of China, but the environmental legislation related to it started very late compared to many other countries in Europe. So the modern environmental management basically started in 1970s, and from the first National Environmental Protection Conference in 1973. And then the first special environmental law was passed in 1979. But in the first 40 years, the environmental management and the treatment was still mainly focused on the industry and the cities pollution. The agricultural pollution treatment problems that it was accumulated and become more and more serious actually during this period. So until 2014, the agricultural non-point treatment was firstly pointed out in the National Agriculture Congress and documented by the Department of Agriculture of China. So which means the environmental protection in the agriculture area was put into our national development plan. And so in China, actually the National People's Congress is the highest organ of state power. It provides the national development plan, strategy, and the legislative framework. And then the related departments will make the policies and the regulations depends on the whole plan and framework. About the environment and the agriculture side, there are two national departments, which are Ministry of Ecology and Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. They made the national environmental and agriculture regulations, and then give to the provincial governments. They will make the more detailed local environmental laws and regulations depends on the local situation, and then they will enforce the legislation and do the monitoring. So the latest policies were updated for the 14th five-year plan. So Chinese central government would draft the goals to strengthen the national economy and social development every 5 years. So the policies would be amended depending on the new goals. During the 14th five-year plan, which is during 2021 to 2025, we focus pay more attention to the environmental protection And the agriculture is we want to transit the agriculture gradually to green and sustainable one. In the meantime, to keep the agriculture developed and increasing farmers' income, we also want to improve our rural area environment more. So the long-term objectives before the 2035 is to make the agriculture non-point pollution initially under control and keep the soil and the water environmental quality stable and also improve the whole agricultural ecological environment. Some new policies and regulations are designed to achieve these goals. In summary, the policies will mainly focus on to improve the agriculture non-point pollution treatment. This is the main pollution issue we want to solve in the agriculture area. And to achieve this, we also need to improve the monitoring system and to enforce the whole legislation. And also the policies and the investment, scientific support, and the public awareness on the environment protection also gets the high attention too. So to achieve these goals, there are a lot of challenges. First of all, the treatment of non-point pollution is difficult, and it needs the collaboration from government, industries, and farmers together. And due to the large scale of China, the laws it's very difficult to fully implement it. For example, like we have the national environmental monitor network. We have our national regulations and very detailed regulations, but it's hard to reach the small farm level sampling, and the laws enforcement is also very difficult to reach such level too. And the fundings on the agricultural pollution treatment is also not enough because the most investment is still used on the yield and the development much more. And also the communication between the national, provincial, and local scale is weak. Which makes the public awareness on the environment protection is weak too. So now we can hand back to Owen to talk about his visits.
Yes, thanks, Wenxuan. So that's a really good background. So I'll now show you a few slides, lots of pictures here. Hopefully it'll be interesting of the different areas. So my first stop really was in Shenyang, where I visited large-scale farming first. Okay, so as you can see in the photograph here, right up to an urban area, but this is like hundreds of thousands of hectares of maize. Fodder maize is the main crop that is being planted here. So farming on an industrial scale really here, right? Now the major problem environmentally at the moment is that the rainfall has gone from, as Wenxuan said, around at 500 mil, right? And it's going up over 700 mil in the last few years, and that's putting pressure on all sorts of things in relation to the fodder maize crop. In particular, there's no drainage in the fields, so and there's no drainage outlets. So you can see there from the photo, there's an awful lot of soil damage, an awful lot of flooding that goes on. In fact, the fields are actually slightly lower elevation than the arterial drainage system. So the solution here is a very expensive one, in that water needs to be pumped out of the fields into the arterial drainage systems. And this, of course, is water quality and issues, soil fertility, in that you're now pumping a lot of the nutrients in the soil out into the water system. And as you can see there's an awful lot of soil quality issues in terms of soil compaction. If you look there in the photo, you can see that there's heavy machinery that needs to access the fodder maize. And if you saw in the last photo, there's an awful lot of diggers to help the machinery out of sticky situations when they do get caught. So you're trafficking soil here in conditions that are bad. It's bad for the soil quality for the crop in the following year. Also, the yields are being affected, and that's a big concern going forward. Now, there's a company in Shenyang called Vland, and they provide really soil testing. They provide advice in terms of fertilizer application, but they also then provide an entire package. So they from seed basically to harvest, they do everything for the farmers at this scale, and they also then take the crop away and they bale it, and they're involved in the sale of the crop as well. Now, if you move along, they have a facility, so there's a crossover here between advisory and research like we would have in Teagasc. They have this huge facility. It's a long-term trial for maize crops, where they grow the maize crops in these blocks, and then they test out different fertilizers. They have a big emphasis now on organic fertilizer substitution, trying to get the balance and crop varieties correct. If you notice there at our feet, it's very green. The soil is very, very green. That's actually from the recent flooding event. So they're also looking at crop varieties that might be able to withstand higher rainfall amounts in poor drained soils going forward. And there's a project ongoing with European partners as well at this site. So now go from that industrial scale to maybe what we would say smaller scale, but it's 125 farms that have created a cooperative together, and there's lots of these cooperatives out in rural areas where the advisor from VLand lives locally. They have amongst this 125 farms are about 1 to 5 hectares in size. It's all maize fodder. And the company locally provides all of the machinery, the fertilizer, the soil testing for these 125 farms. And then the farm labourers that help these farmers also have their own maize fodder in single lines along roadways. And these are cut by hand. So you have industrial, you have small holders, and then you have really, really small farmers right alongside each other in this kind of transition right across the landscape. So VLAN for our visit would have documented our visit, and also in terms of extension, we would have talked about, for example, the Teagasc Green Book would have been discussed on this trip. I'm very, very interested in the application rates. Their application rates will be higher than ours, and of course that has implications for water quality going forward. So moving then away from the rural area back to the city, this is the Chinese Agriculture University in Beijing. In the middle there you have Professor Chen, and he was the guy that came over to Ramaran to us and started off this collaboration. In terms of what we both do together, there's an emphasis here on soil phosphorus and nitrogen, phosphorus dynamics and how that's turned over in soil, and how we can replace chemical fertilizers with organic fertilizers. So there's a huge opportunity here to do the same research with our soils and our crops, particularly grassland, for example, in our systems. As Wenxuan mentioned earlier, they do an awful lot of agriculture non-point or diffuse pollution research. And they also are looking at alternative fertilizers. So, for example, waste recycling as fertilizers to land. And we do a lot of that here ourselves. Then we moved on to the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences in Beijing. And here's Fan, who was the PhD student that came over to Ireland way back in 2017. And if you could have a comparison, CAAS is exactly like Teagasc here in Ireland. So they carry out research to support policy, for example, and they do an awful lot of similar things to us here in Teagasc. So here's Fan presenting the research on greenhouse gases and water pollutants in Eastern China. And then myself and Wenxuan would have presented all our work to his department. Okay, so I'm presenting even work here that we had in collaboration with New Zealand. And Wenxuan here is presenting her work on the EPA-funded Aspen project. So there's a huge crossover between soil, biodiversity, greenhouse gases, and water research between the two areas. So here's a flavour of what they do in CAAS. They focus on different scales like we do. So they focus on field scale, watershed scale, so watershed being catchments like our agricultural catchments program, and then they also have national scale monitoring and simulation of losses. But what's very, very interesting is they have a national monitoring network for NPNS built up over the eastern part of China and to a lesser extent in the western part. And it covers 26 provinces, and there's a collaboration between 34 institutes and universities where they monitor similar things in all of those different provinces, and then they can bring that research together. So we visited one of these soil fertility and fertilizer efficiency centers on the cinnamon chow soil type just outside Beijing. And in terms of soil health, these now are being rebranded as soil health research centers. So they're long-term centers of research, and there's 8 of them now all over eastern China covering the major soil types. So soil health is big news here as well. It also is over in China. And at this facility, it's a great opportunity. They have crops grown, they're able to look at leaching down to groundwater, and they're also measure greenhouse gases. You can see in the background here that maize fodder is planted in these concrete kind of a bunker type system, and that helps you to do above ground experiments, but also you can go underneath, and these lysimeters here capture drainage water, and we can look at the nutrient content in the drainage water that would go to groundwater. We have similar facilities like this here in Johnstown Castle. Okay, so there's collaboration between data and how we analyze data going forward, and how we analyze the samples for different things as well. Also, they brought us out, and they're a big fan of these long-term facilities where crops are grown in blocks, where then you can use different fertilizers, different balances of fertilizers to look at crop yields and environmental losses from those. So it's a really good resource across China, different soil types, different climatic regions. And again, we have our own Signpost series, which does this in Ireland. And I think there's great opportunities again to learn from each other and how we do this. Just looking at the dots on the map of China there, you can see how much monitoring does go on from a research perspective, okay, to groundwater, to surface water, across, as Wenxuan was saying, that climate going from temperate to tropical, but also across the different crop growing regions of the east. We do very similar things. Here's field leachate monitoring. We have systems like this around Ireland now. And also in the heavier soils, like the heavy soil program we have in Teagasc, looking at field runoff and losses from drainage systems as well. This is a very interesting concept that I've taken home from Eastern China. They have these living labs or lighthouse farms, which we're also in trying to get going here in Europe, where they have a particular climate, a particular soil type, and a particular crop system, and they monitor those systems to high degrees with high resolution monitoring. So if you think about the cross correlation to Ireland, we now have our NASCO sites, which are the National Soil Carbon Observatories, where we also then will look at soil, crop, losses to water. We will be looking at peat soils and greenhouse gases from emissions from those, and also looking at detailed carbon stock calculations, for example. So they're doing exactly the same in some parts of China, but just the cropping systems are different. And here's rice cropping systems, for example. And the last one really that they have a huge focus on is developing new fertilizer products. In CAAS, this is a huge part of what they do now, to have that win-win scenario where you're getting yields that you need, but with less environmental consequences in terms of losses to water, but also losses to air. So there's great opportunities for us to learn from this side of things. Then I moved along and we went to the High Bay Academy of Agriculture and Forestry Sciences. And this is slightly different. There's an awful lot of greenhouse or glasshouse facilities here, where vegetables are grown inside in these glasshouse systems. So again, from a drainage perspective, it was very interesting to see how the different irrigation systems were being used. Again, you can see in the photo, there's monitoring downwards and upwards, so leaching of nutrients from these systems to groundwater. And then outside, you can see cabbage crops here where they're measuring greenhouse gas emissions. At high resolution, you can see the amount of monitoring going on. So here's where water meets greenhouse gas emission research, and also then what fertilizers are being used. Where are the nutrients going up and down? We're developing an awful lot of emission factors here in Europe, and I think that's some research that we could transfer over to the Chinese side of things. Then I'm going to go on to my last stop. So I went to Shenzhen, right down in the south, where it's very, very warm and very humid, so completely different. You can see here, so we had an open day in Johnstown Castle recently. This was the board I was on, for example. And these are the kinds of things in terms of dissemination of information and what we were doing while we were there. So showcasing all of Teagasc research on soil, biodiversity, gaseous emissions, and even, going into detail on our national water campaign, where we're looking at 8 actions of change for water quality. So these are the kinds of things that we're ahead in some aspects, and we're certainly not behind, but we can learn from things also in China. And again, there was great interest in what we were doing over there, and dissemination also occurred from a knowledge transfer perspective during and after our visit from that side. So here's the group. They're a very, very big group. A lot of young researchers getting involved in environmental research in China. And there's a huge ambition there, for example, to go into policy, but also to stay in research. So I think it's a similar ambition at the research areas in China and here. Again, the focus here in the south is on phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon dynamics. And certainly from a technological perspective, it was very interesting in that they have a lot of technology here in the Sun Yat-sen University that we do not have here in Ireland or even in Europe. So I think going forward, there's great opportunities for example, to test our samples here over at that location. So in terms of our take-home messages, I think we can summarize, we can discuss a lot of these. There's synergy between Teagasc and all of the Chinese collaborators across soil, water, and greenhouse gas, and also in ecology and biodiversity. There's research going on as well. As Wenxuan would have gone through, there is national environmental regulation and monitoring in place, but it's in an imbalanced way in China potentially at the moment. There's a difference between poor and rich areas, and they do vary widely. One of the big things is environmental awareness is low amongst the general populace in China, and at farm level, development and profits versus environmental goals are still probably imbalanced. So that's it from the two of us, and I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Great, thank you very much for that. Now, that really gave us a great insight into, I suppose, some of the challenges that are being faced by farmers in China, and obviously the moves then to try and remedy some of the environmental to change the direction of some of the environmental metrics. You spoke, Wenxuan, a lot about regulation in your presentation, and I suppose I come from the advisory side of the house here in Teagasc, and there's obviously you need to support people in changing their behaviours. Could you talk to us a little bit about those types of supports that are in place for farmers in China in terms of advisory services, or are there grants, or are there subsidies available to farmers?
I think that currently to farmers, the most important thing is improve our public awareness on the environmental protection part, because in general speaking, also the on the agriculture side, the yield, the crop qualities, and the whole agricultural development is still the main attention of China. But now we are trying to transit to the green and sustainable agriculture. So, but the farmers' awareness, the public awareness about this is like the thing we need to the new policies need to support. Well, I know there will be a lot of new detailed policies to support them, like give the farmers more fundings and give them the advisory how to change from the traditional farming to the organic farming, and helps of course the most important thing is to help them to increase their income, because the farmers in China is basically they are poor. And these are all the things the government are focused on.
I found Mark, maybe in that first location where I was, that VLand, it really is an advisory company, right? So, but farmers, it's a private company, right? So farmers aren't getting this information for free, right? So you can imagine then this suits, the larger farmers to the middle size, but once you go below that, it's kind of they're outside of that net, There seemed to be a good system in place for soil fertility. Nutrient management was a big thing, and I'll be honest, it surprised me how detailed that was. But I suppose it's fertilizer prices seem to be low, and the tendency is that the application rates are still higher than what we would be used to. But I think there's a realization that alternative fertilizers could be used to save money, and therefore the disconnect, I feel, still is right at the end, where the motivation is still very much at the crop yield production side. Things aren't in place, at the end of pipe, I suppose, going out into the water environment at that local scale. But it's a scale issue, I think. Just the sheer scale of the larger farms was something I've never seen before. It's certainly farming on an industrial scale.
Just in terms of, I suppose, learnings for Ireland, was there anything that you brought home that you thought might be relevant for Irish farming?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose from what I did realize is that we know an awful lot about our systems, right? That for example, my background is in drainage. Certainly, I'll give you an example. Like the solution for the maize fodder was, when the flooding arrives, to delay the harvest of the crop. That could be an idea, where they let the land freeze, right? So literally will turn into an ice block, which would allow machinery onto the fields to cut everything. But they're going to have a huge yield loss if they continue to do that. My suggestion was absolutely to start installing drainage systems, but with potentially mitigation of water quality at the end of those. The scale is large enough to do that. It's very similar to the Midwest in the US, where blocks of land are drained to one point, where they now have bioreactors there to clean the water before it's discharged. I think there's huge potential. These are low-cost mitigation options, but you need scale for them to work. That could be so. In terms of where they're caught in that their arterial drainage system is at a higher level than the fields, and pumping is not going to be a long-term solution to that. So the thing I learned is we know an awful lot about, because of the nature of our land and our systems, we know an awful lot about land drainage and how to control water on landscapes. And it's very, very important, because you can do all the soil fertility and nutrient management you want, but if fields are getting flooded and all those nutrients are being washed away, what's going to happen for next year's crop in the ground? You're going to have to invest an awful lot more in building up soil fertility constantly. It's a losing battle in a way.
Yeah, and it's something I'm sure we can cover on another episode in terms of the future intensity of rainfall events that we're expecting here in Ireland and the consequences of that. Cathal, we have a good number of questions coming through from our audience this morning.
Yeah, the general comments come in, Mark, that really, really interesting topic, and people think it's really excellent to see the similarities between Ireland and China. Quick one for you, Wenxuan. You spoke a lot about the east side of the country and a lot of the agriculture's going on there. What's the west side of the country like?
Actually, the landscape, there are big difference between the east and the west side. We have actually imaginary line about it. It separates the whole country to east and the west, and the population densities, landscape, and the weather are huge difference. So for example, in the east side, it mainly consists of the plain and the plain hills, but in the west side there are mainly plateau, desert, and grassland. So basically, on the west side, I think there are definitely agriculture, but mainly depends on the grazing livestock, these things. It's not a good environment it doesn't have a good environment for the cultivation and the crops,
Yeah, and there's a question here around carbon capture and forestry, planting trees. What is there much forestry in China, or is there an emphasis on encouraging people to plant forests?
The forestry in China also located in some specific areas, not it's of course not across the whole country. Well, as I know, there are a big forestry in the eastern north part of China, like I think the graph you can see I showed at the west part of China, there's definitely no so much forest, but because mainly the plateau and the desert, and thinking south part of China, there are some tropical forests. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, you mentioned maize being one of the main crop in China. What is the other main crops, and how about the beef industry and the dairy industry? Is that big in China?
Well, they are also big in China because the large area of the west, they cannot be cultivated. So the main industry is the dairy, grazing. But the way we are grazing is to be honest, it's very different with Ireland, because the land is huge and the grassland is huge. So, and the people living there they are all most of them from the ancient time they are nomads. So yeah, I think the grazing way is very different with Ireland.
Yeah, Owen, one here for you. As a visitor to China, we have one of our viewers here was in China in the last couple of years. And I'm going to pronounce this wrong. I'd say Wenxuan, so correct me. It's Liaoning, I think. Liaoning, yeah. So they visited there, and they were struck by the lack of organic matter in the soils, very grey, dead, dull-looking soils, and speaking to the local farmers, that they said they had to put an awful lot of fertilizer into them to get the crops to produce. And I suppose they were concerned with this. You'll get the yields, but where does all that fertilizer go? Does it end up in the rivers? Does it end up gaseous emissions? Or what's the problem maybe there?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think it's site-specific and soil-specific, but as I was saying, there's eight research areas now picking up on the main soil types right across all the cultivation areas. Certainly where I was, where the maize fodder was grown, it's not a sustainable system at the moment. You could see there from a soil health perspective, a lot of soil compaction. The soils where I was, they were quite heavy. I was very surprised there was no land drainage in the fields. They were quite heavy in nature for what I would say a tillage crop in comparison to what we would have. And definitely I think there's a realization that organic fertilizers are going to have to be used to start building up, organic matter, building up resilient structure in the soils, and it can't be just all chemical fertilizers. So I think that was a huge, maybe I didn't say it or strongly emphasize it enough, but the substitution of chemical to organic is a huge research area here. And how far can you push that substitution? And therefore, can you build organic matter in your soils? Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I would imagine that would be different in the different provinces and regions where the soil types differ as well,
We have a question here. Again, somebody complimenting you on the fascinating insight that you provided into Chinese ag environmental challenges. But is there pressure coming from consumers to improve the environmental sustainability of food produced by the Chinese? And if so, how is that communicated to farmers in their production system, or by farmers in their production systems? Are there incentives coming from industry through the supply chain to farmers to incentivize them to produce food in a more environmentally friendly way?
Well, I think it's still mainly depends on the future development plan from our central government.
Mm-hmm.
Because we it has been our development plan and framework for long that we want to improve our environment, at least for 10 years, I can say. So when the central government make this plan and the decision, the local government will of course will implement it gradually, and after 10 years implement. So now it's already on the way to the transiting to the more environmental friendly way and sustainable way. Because in the past few 20 years something, the environmental pollution is actually a big problem in China.
Mm-hmm. And what do the sort of broader society think of this, or is this a concern for the people living in the cities, that they want to see their food produced in a more sustainable way?
Yes, I think it's well, it's also it depends on our public awareness, So since we have the plan and the thinking, so idea, so our public awareness is also increasing. So the people in the cities, but actually the organic crops, fruits, these things are becoming more and more popular in our mind. And actually, I can tell you they can be more expensive or something in the market. Yeah, so people just think it's much healthier and more environmental friendly to eating the organic food from the organic farming.
Mm-hmm.
And technical question here. Owen, what kind of fertilizer did you see in the yards if you're around, or Wenxuan maybe? For example, are the farmers using protected urea or 18612 or CAN, or what's their main fertilizer of choice?
Wow, that's a good question. That's a very detailed question. Yeah, I didn't see any. Okay, I'll be really honest. I didn't actually see what they were using specifically. There was no mention of protected urea, definitely. I think you're talking really here, chemical fertilizers. The balance between the nutrients is slightly different for different crops. So that conversation seemed to be quite new, if I'm really honest. I was on about less, for example, lower emission slurry spreading, protected urea. And that was a new conversation in that space. The one where it was a similar discussion was around nutrient use efficiency was a big topic while I was there, and trying to understand the fertilizer equivalency value of new organic fertilizers. So we would have did a lot of work here, and Wenxuan would have did a lot of work on dairy processing sludges and alternative fertilizers. they are also very interested in that. So where I was in the north, there was an awful lot of pig slurry being spread on land, and I think a lot of where's the maize fodder going? It's going, I think, an awful lot. There's a huge kind of poultry and pig industry in that area as well. So I think a lot of organic fertilizers were coming, over and back between those two industries at the same location. But no, I wasn't given access to the sheds there on the farms to have a poke around. That's for sure. Yeah.
Next time, stick your head in through the door. But there's something that actually raised a slight concern for me when you mentioned Wenxuan, about the private companies are giving the agriculture advice on nutrient management planning or nutrient application. Is that regulated in some way, or is it a free for all? Like I know in Ireland we have that going on here, and it's done really well. But the Green Book is there and Teagasc is there, so there's an eye over it.
So, in other words, the private advisory service, but is there, in Ireland, you have a service provided by someone like Teagasc as well. Would there be, would government provide any advice to farmers outside of them having to pay for that advice?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That the government definitely give the guidance, and the private company following the guidance to give the advisory to the farmers, because still it's because of the big scale. So you cannot depend on the government to do everything, and there's definitely some collaboration between the private companies and the governments, to do these things together, and I think that there's the advice give, some are for free, some are for you can pay. You would need to pay for the more detailed advice.
Yeah, but it's a good comment, Cathal, because what I noticed was, I mentioned it earlier, the Green Book, Teagasc Green Book, application rates were definitely lower than the ones that are going on to the similar crops. And it's not necessarily a soil difference there. So I think there is a lot of research going on how to optimize application rates from the research side. I think the problem is that making its way onto farms, and if there isn't a high resolution testing or regulation there, that's the big question for me. How will things change? Where is the mechanism to motivate change? And that for me was still missing, maybe.
Could I ask, while you were there, Owen, and maybe mention you want to comment on this, how is Irish farming perceived by the society or the people that you met, or in China? Like, maybe Ireland's such a small country, relative to China, but just be interesting to know, did you pick up any views on that?
For me, I noticed a big change and shift in the amount of dairy being consumed since 2019 to just the period gone. So there's definitely an awareness of Ireland from the dairy perspective, right, as being one of the major players globally in dairy. That did come up quite often, So I give you an example. On the airplane on the way over, I was given a carton of milk. Yogurts were big in terms of food options. And I saw that was a bit of a change from my first visit over there, right? So there is certainly a dairy expansion underway there. And if they know Ireland, I think it's because of that. Beef as well came up quite often, So in terms of when I was out in cereal farms, it probably showing them, where Ireland was on a map, maybe. But in terms of conversations around dairy and livestock, certainly they were very aware of Ireland and exporting of Irish products. The high quality of Irish export products was a thing mentioned to me quite often. Yeah.
Wenxuan, do farmers own their own land predominantly in China, or do they lease a lot of land?
Oh, both. Yeah, some farmers own their own the lands. Some of them, lease from the big farmers or the governments, I think. Yeah.
And now that the farms are getting bigger and scaling up, are the smaller farmers kind of getting driven out and the bigger farmers getting bigger?
Yeah, I suppose it's probably controlled by the government now. But to be honest, it was a big problem in the ancient time. But I don't think it's a very important problem for now, because the government would control the land you owned.
Just a comment here. Just wondering, maybe why did it take China so long to I suppose put policy in place to tackle the agricultural pollution issues in water quality?
You mean from the 40 years what I mentioned, or just the recent years?
Yeah, was there policy put in place in the 90s, was it? I can't remember from your presentation.
Okay, yeah, but to be honest, the pollution on the agricultural side is actually not the main pollution issue in China. So when the environmental regulations set up at first, our main focus attention was still on the industry, the pollution from the cities. So the agricultural side, it's not a main issue of our pollution in China. So that's why it started. It's actually formally started very late, and then then after it started, the non-point diffusion pollution is not a very easy thing to be solved, and it's need to change as well. We mentioned like the farmers here, we use a lot of fertilizers in China, right? So we need to change farmers' awareness that we should use less fertilizers, but they are already used to that way. So we need to change their awareness to turn to the organic farming. And the farmers are already used to the high yields way. So it will take a long time I think it will take a long time to do this transit and to solve the pollution issues.
Yeah, and on I suppose soil health was kind of popping up there the whole time during the presentation, and I know you have a big interest in that, and drainage. And we looked at a lot of the fields that you showed us, obviously had a lot of phosphorus loss and overland flow. And if you could go out there, how would you fix it?
Yeah, really good question. I think the arterial drainage system is a big thing that needs to be changed, but it's controlled by national government, right? So there's there's the local farmer versus the national system at play there, and they're literally in the wrong direction. You couldn't for a low rainfall system, they're designed for that. But as climate is changing, that's now where it's going to be a real problem going forward. Saturated fields are not good for crops. They're not good for soil health in general, And what happens is, as the field's wet and dry, they become wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry. There's a huge release of nutrients. And as I was saying then, soil fertility becomes imbalanced, and that forces people to apply more to try to counterbalance that, So the key would be, I think it's a mix of changing the arterial drainage system going forward, but making sure then there's mechanisms in place to balance soil fertility, and you'll need to clean the nutrients being lost to the drainage system, because that's going to have huge, negative effects downstream for the rivers and aquatic systems attached to those huge areas. Like, the scale of this is humongous. It's hard to visualize it, like our landscapes, we've hedgerows, defining lovely distinct blocks and parcels of land. These are huge, huge areas. And on an industrial scale. Opportunities there, but there's a lot of threats as well, you know.
Okay, we're unfortunately out of time. I don't know where that hour went. A fascinating insights into the agri-environmental challenges that are experienced in East China, and we hope you can come back to us again and give us an update after maybe your next trip. Yeah, it's I suppose a reminder of maybe the progress also that's being made here in Ireland as well, and the good work that's happening. Cathal, thanks for helping out with questions. Thanks to Mary in the background. Next week, we're going to be joined by Dr. Dermot Hughes from Glassport Bio, where we'll be discussing green energy boosting technology for sustainable pig production. So do join us for that. And just a reminder that next week, next Wednesday, the Teagasc National Dairy Conference takes place at Limerick Racecourse. If you haven't, or if you're interested in registering, just go onto the Teagasc website, and strong focus on agricultural sustainability throughout that conference, water quality, greenhouse gases, all of the various challenges being discussed during that event. So until next week, thank you all. Stay warm, and we will talk to you next Friday. Thank you.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.